On November 13th, 2022, we entered the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder.
After pleading guilty, Bryan Kohberger is hours away from officially becoming a convicted quadruple murderer. He's finally admitting to stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death, but the terms of his plea agreement are not sitting well with some, including the President of the United States. I look at what we can expect from Kohberger's sentencing, where he could serve his time, and the questions that remain. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy, and I'm coming to you from outside the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho. This is where Bryan Kohberger will be sentenced for the murders of Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle. Bryan Kohberger changed his plea to guilty on July 2nd, finally admitting to murdering those 4 beautiful college students. Take a look.
With respect to count 1, burglary felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 2, murder in the first degree, as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogen, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, as it relates to murder in the first degree for the murder of Kaylee Goncalves, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Now, that change in plea came just weeks before jury selection in Kohberger's trial was set to begin here in Ada County. That plea may not have been as surprising as the timing of it, because Kohberger seemed prepared to go to trial. But then something seemed to change after Judge Hippler denied his request for a continuance and his request to introduce 4 alternate suspects at his trial. Kohberger's defenses were limited, and the evidence, including his DNA on a K-bar knife sheath found at the crime scene, video of Kohberger's white car circling the neighborhood at the time of the murders, along with his cell phone being off at the time of the murders, painted a damning picture of Kohberger's guilt. Kohberger's defense team approached the state about making a deal. The families of Maddie Mogen and Ethan Chapin support the plea agreement, while Kaylee Goncalves' family opposes it, along with Xana Kernodle's father. Xana's mother supports the plea deal. Now, this plea deal has been controversial, with some weighing in saying that Kohberger is essentially getting off easy for committing 4 incredibly brutal murders. And one person who is weighing in, the President of the United States. Can you believe it? Take a look at this. President Donald Trump on Monday posted on Truth Social, Bryan Kohberger, who was responsible in Idaho for the deaths of 4 wonderful young souls, has made a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. These were vicious murders with so many questions left unanswered. While life imprisonment is tough, it's certainly better than receiving the death penalty. But before sentencing, I hope the judge makes Kohberger, at a minimum, explain why he did these horrible murders. There are no explanations. There is no nothing. People were shocked that he was able to plea bargain, but the judge should make him explain what happened. Thank you for your attention to this matter. The Goncalves family shared the post on their Facebook page, writing, I definitely do not want to get into politics at all, so I hesitated to even post this, but wow, absolutely shocked. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, Ethan, you have always mattered so much. You are so loved, and your nature, your light, your entire being is so bright and visible. You guys did this. You guys deserve every last ounce of recognition for this. Now, I want to be 100% clear about something. President Trump has no say whatsoever in these proceedings. This is a state case, and he is the President of the United States, but he is never shy about chiming in on the news of the day. And this case has certainly touched many, many people, and it's certainly caught the president's attention. I reached out to the White House for further comment. At the time of this recording, I have not yet heard back. Now, after Kohberger is sentenced, he will likely be transferred to Idaho's maximum security institution, where prison officials will assess him and his needs. But he could be transferred to another prison because of concerns for his safety, or ultimately, he could be transferred out of state.
This is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible to take part in a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients were not properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan that QR code that you see on your screen, click the link below, or go to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. I want to bring in Mark Weaver. He's been covering this case with me from pretty much the very beginning. And Mark, thank you so much for joining me. You know, you have prosecuted high-profile death penalty cases. So when it gets to sentencing, this is the time for victims. Even though the sentence in this case is largely predetermined, we believe the judge will go along with 4 consecutive life sentences. This is the time for the victims to let the court know and put it on the record about the impact this crime has had on them.
It's true. Sentencing in murder cases is really the hardest thing for me. Listening to the pain of these family members and what they went through when they lost their loved one. No one knows how they're going to react. I've seen people yell and scream at the defendant. I've seen people forgive and offer, prayers for the defendant. And every family has its own unique way of grieving. And so the actual tactics of a case are interesting to me as a prosecutor, the jury selection and the cross-examination and how to argue the case. But all I do is sit back and listen and have a lot of respect for these people who, in the worst moment of their life, have to stand up in public in front of the whole world, because this will be televised. It'll be a big deal, and shed some light on their pain.
What do you expect to come from the sentencing? Will the prosecution maybe disclose any more details about the evidence that they gathered in the case? And I ask that because at the plea agreement, when the plea was entered, the plea agreement in court a couple of weeks ago, it seemed like almost like an overview of the probable cause affidavit, an overview of the evidence. But this is the time for the prosecutor to really tell the judge, even though the judge knows a lot about the evidence, to really go into possibly aggravating evidence and aggravating factors about why they felt this agreement was the best choice and why 4 consecutive life sentences are necessary and why this person should never have the opportunity to ever walk out on the streets again.
Yeah, as I've told you in our previous interviews, I respect the prosecutor's decision to take the death penalty off the table because it guarantees a result for everybody. And I understand why people might have different views on that. I think you're right. I think we might hear some new facts. This is a big spotlight on a small town prosecutor. And I'm sure that whole team has heard some of the criticisms that came out after that hearing about how much information was given and how little facts that we didn't know was given. And I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecutor seeks to fill in some of those gaps, if for no other reason, to maybe address some of that criticism and maybe help the victims find out a little bit more about what happened. Because remember, when Kohberger goes to prison, other than him doing a media interview, which that's up to the prison authorities whether he can or not, we may never see him again or ever hear his side of this again.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of prisons don't allow that. I mean, in South Carolina, Alec Murdaugh, that's Exhibit A. They do not allow prisoners to conduct interviews. He did one anyway with the documentary crew by phone, and he got into a lot of trouble for it. He lost a lot of privileges. But they don't permit, a lot of prisons, a lot of states don't permit inmates to do interviews.
Which is why this might be our last chance to hear from this defendant. He is entitled to speak. I'm going to guess he won't.
And I was going to ask you that. You don't think Bryan Kohberger will speak?
He's such an odd person. Obviously, anybody who commits these murders is not somebody who's stable. But he's such an odd person. And the way he conducted himself at that hearing made him seem even odder to me. Almost he had a kind of a flat affect about what was going on. But we have seen murderers over the years use their moment in the stage to spout their crazy theories. But that tends to be more the political murderers who have some ideological thing. There's something personal going on in this guy's head. I don't know that he wants to share that with the world. And my guess is his parents have encouraged him not to.
What about his attorney?
Yeah, these attorneys, boy, they've had a lot to say over the last several months, haven't they, with their motions and their arguments, some of which were, I think, irresponsible and beyond even what defense lawyers should be doing as part of their job. Uh, they don't have to say anything. Everyone kind of knows what the result is going to be. And so when you can't affect the result, you're not going to see lawyers getting up and trying to make very passionate arguments. These defense lawyers have done what the best they could do, which was to take that death penalty off the table. I think the prosecution will say something for the reasons we've discussed, maybe filling in some of the gaps. The defendant may or may not say something, but there's very little the defense counsel can say.
And I think that was the defense's goal the whole time. If you look at how many times they tried to get the death penalty stricken, I think that was their goal the whole time. That was their strategy. Let's get the death penalty removed if we can, and then we will talk to him about the evidence and try to get him to enter a guilty plea.
You're right. In another era where there's not DNA evidence and digital evidence and cell phone video evidence or cell tower evidence and then Ring camera video evidence, when those things weren't there, you could see a defense lawyer in this case trying to argue for reasonable doubt to a jury. But as the noose closed around Bryan Kohberger, his lawyers knew they only had one option, and that was to try to get the death penalty off the table. And they did it for the reasons we've discussed over and over.
So I want to go back to something else that we just discussed a little earlier. His defense team obviously felt like the evidence against their client was compelling and that it was strong. Specifically, particularly, I don't know how they felt they were ever going to challenge the DNA on the knife sheath. Then we have the cell phone pings. We have, whatever else they collected, the white Elantra circling the area. Like a predator just circling the area. It's just horrific. Why did the prosecutor, it seemed like he was underselling his case. Like, oh, we don't have this. We don't have a proof that he was ever connected to, we don't have evidence that he was ever connected to anyone in the house. We don't have this. We don't have that. During that plea hearing, it seemed like he was trying to justify accepting the plea by saying what they didn't have instead of talking and focusing on what they did have.
I had that same feeling. The things he pointed to that he didn't have were not necessary to prove guilt. There is no perfect prosecution case in a case like this. You're never going to have every single piece of the puzzle filled in. And when I do my opening statements to juries, I'll often tell them this will be like a puzzle, but you won't need all the pieces to be filled in to see what the image of the puzzle is. So again, big spotlight on a small town prosecutor. No one has ever seen this sort of coverage or scrutiny or pressure before. Certainly not in Idaho in a rural county. And so I think this prosecutor is doing the best he can under these difficult circumstances. I have had to help make that decision, whether you take the death penalty off the table, a death penalty case I did last year. We had to make that very tough decision with of course, family input before we did so. But at the very least, this guarantees there will not be an appeal that will let this guy get another trial, let him get out early. And we know that for his natural life, he will remain in prison, even though it wasn't technically a life without parole plea change.
So you expect possibly Bill Thompson to fill in some gaps. Maybe there will be a presentation of sorts. Maybe he'll say some additional things at the hearing, because I would expect if he does that he will have already disclosed these things to the families, because they need to be made aware of any new evidence that's going to be brought about or, exposed to the public before it comes out. That's just kind of the right thing to do.
It is. As always, you want the family to know these things first. They shouldn't have to read about it in the press. They shouldn't necessarily have to hear about it in open court. And that's one of the reasons why an open channel of communication between prosecutors and the victim's family is so important. Now, we know now the four families had different views. They were of different minds on this plea, and that's okay. Everyone can have their own view. But when you get elected prosecutor, and I've only ever been an assistant, I don't want to be the elected prosecutor, but when you get elected prosecutor, you are given the great responsibility to make that final call. And all you can do is listen to your investigators, listen to your assistants, listen to the family, and then ultimately the voters give you the decision to whether you're going to resolve the case. This prosecutor did, and he will rise or fall on this case probably more than any other in his career.
Yeah, and he's at the end of his career. He's planning to retire. He was planning to retire a while ago. So I think we'll see him retiring shortly after this sentencing. Another thing, Mark, the families, there will be, I think, some very emotional statements made. But there are sometimes limitations on what victims can say at sentencing. Why is that? Especially when you have a person saying, yeah, you got me, I did it. I'm admitting guilt. I'm admitting I did it. I'm admitting I broke into that house to commit the crime of murder. So why can't the victims just say what's on their mind?
They should be able to. In Idaho, in a capital case, this is no longer a capital case. In a capital case in Idaho, the victims do have some significant limitations about what they can say at sentencing. I don't think that applies here. There is a victims' rights constitutional amendment in the Idaho Constitution, which gives them broad ability to be able to say their mind. The only thing the statute says is they can't say something that would create a manifest injustice. It's hard to see there would be a manifest injustice given that the sentence is largely already set. If this judge is smart, he will not interrupt these victims. He will allow these victims to have their say, which is part of their closure process. And we may learn more about their insight about this plea once we hear them talk, at least the three families.
Yeah. We know that the Chapins have told NBC News they are not going. They have not wanted to attend any of the court proceedings. They've only attended one, and that is when Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty, and they said they wanted to support the plea agreement. So it will be really sad to watch this hearing and the pain. We will hear from the families, the pain that they've endured, and they will continue to endure pain for years to come, Mark, but at least this will close a chapter for them, and maybe they can move forward and start continue to honor their loved ones instead of dealing with hearings and trials and appeals, because there won't be any appeals.
That's right. This side of heaven, there's very little joy in cases like this. All we can hope for is the most amount of closure possible for the victims. Let them honor their loved ones in the best way they want to. And maybe they can be an example to the rest of us of how somebody goes through difficulties like this with grace, because some good can come from even these most evil of tragedies.
Do you expect Judge Hippler to say anything to Bryan Kohberger? Because he's made some remarks in the past, things of the he's made it known that he's viewed all of the evidence. And it sounds like he wasn't buying a lot of the defense arguments. So do you expect Judge Hippler to say anything, or do you think he's just going to stick to the kind of the letter of sentencing, or do you expect him to give us, a speech of sorts?
Yeah, judges come out with a pre-written script based on form patterns that are given to judges. They have to read certain things to make sure that the sentence is correct. But most judges, particularly in high-profile cases, will offer some other thoughts. I sit as a part-time acting judge in my local county when the judge is out on training or vacation. And on a case where there's been violence, I always want to have my say as the judge and let the defendant know what his behavior did to people. So I think this judge will do something like that. You have to read the required part first. You have to make sure that all of the elements of the sentencing requirements are met. But I think you will see this judge say something to Bryan Kohberger that won't have much effect on the legal outcome, but maybe it will show some of the victims' families that there are people in the system who hear their pain and want to respond to it.
Well, this is one of the most horrific things I can say that I've ever covered. I've covered a lot of horrific crimes over the years, and this is at the top. Mark Weaver, thank you so much.
Thank you, Angenette.
I want to bring in author Howard Bloom. He wrote a fantastic book, When the Night Comes Falling, a Requiem for the Idaho Student Murders. It also came out in paperback recently, so it's a great book. Howard, thank you so much for coming on. I want to know. With you. Yeah, it's great to be with you. I want to know, first of all, what questions you still have now that sentencing day is approaching?
Well, the irony is I have the same questions I've had for the past 3 years. Nothing has really been answered to any satisfaction. I mean, I'd like to know, why did Kohberger do it? How did he do it? How did he get out of the house? How long he'd been planning this? When you want to look at a list of questions, a good list to look at are the specific questions that Kohberger himself sent out to criminals for his master thesis at DeSalle. I like him to answer the questions that he was posing to criminals about why they had committed such a crime, how long did they think about it, how did they get away with it.
Yeah, and I think there are so many questions that remain. And, from what we know right now, it doesn't appear that prosecutors have sought those answers when they have the defendant admitting to the crime to avoid the death penalty. Maybe they did, and we just don't know about it yet. But as far as we know, there was no requirement that he disclose,
No,
how he
there
did
has
this,
been-
where the murder weapon is, any of that.
No, there's been no requirement at all, and it's very frustrating for me, for the families, more importantly, and for the taxpayers of Idaho, who've paid close to $4 million for this case over the 3 years that it's been moving forward. And I think what makes it so exasperating is that the prosecution just sort of lost the appetite for the fight. They were holding all the cards. They reached this plea deal just after they had won two major judicial decisions. The Kohberger's team had tried to introduce the fact that there were other alternate perpetrators. Well, that got thrown out. And his alibi defense that he'd been looking at the stars on a cloudy night all by himself, well, the judge said that's not an alibi either. So they were holding all the cards to move forward. And yet they finally decided to settle. And I think ultimately, all trials are, you roll the dice, you never know what's going to happen. Every veteran prosecutor knows that. But at the same time, they were in the situation where they could move forward with this case and demand, at the very least, answers. And they didn't demand that either.
You seem to have some pretty good sourcing on this, and you had reported earlier in the year that Bryan Kohberger was inclined to plead guilty. He was interested in possibly seeking a plea deal, but his mother was standing in the way of that. What changed?
Well, as you said, originally when Kohberger's legal team was becoming to realize that this is a case they couldn't win and their client was going to face the long guns of a firing squad, they approached him. They said, let's see if we can get a plea deal. He spoke to then his mother, and she said no. Why she said no, perhaps I don't know specifically. Perhaps she did not want to face the realization that her son was guilty. And after the Dateline special, where they revealed that Kohberger, just 2 hours after the murder, had made a 54-minute call to the number of a phone listed to his father. According to my sources, he spoke largely with his mother during that conversation. What was said, only Kohberger and the people at the other end of the phone know for sure. But in the aftermath of that call, the Kohberger family realized that the prosecution had certain knowledge of that call. They would be asked to go on the stand and testify about what was said, and that might put their knowledge of events in not only being scrutinized, but maybe in legal jeopardy. And when this was explained to Kohberger, he did not feel, as it was explained to me, any guilt, but he felt something akin to remorse. He had put his parents in enough of an uncomfortable situation, an impossible situation, a living hell, actually. And he said, okay, let's move forward with this plea deal. And at the same time, of course, it also saved his life.
When I was at the plea agreement hearing where he pleaded guilty, I did not see him make any eye contact with his parents. Are you telling me he did this against his mother's wishes, or that his mother finally signed off on it?
I don't know if she finally signed off, quite frankly, but I do know that what helped him make this decision was that he did not want to put his parents in legal jeopardy. They were also facing the reality that they would be questioned on the stand, the father, Michael, about what was said by the son in the course of their cross-country trip they had taken just before the Christmas holidays from Washington State to Pennsylvania. Here, at this time, they were sitting shoulder to shoulder in a white Hyundai Elantra. Every policeman in the country was looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. The father knew his son was a problematic young man. He had been put on alert as soon as he came to Washington State, and he saw Brian's mood. He had seen these moods before. And now he knew that his son lived just about 9 miles away from where this quadruple murder occurred. It had to occur to him that something was off, that something was building. And in the course of this journey, as was explained to me, Michael Kohberger started getting closer and closer to the realization that, oh my gosh, my son was a monster. He couldn't quite make this leap yet, but he was getting information that made him very, very suspicious.
Do you expect the Kohbergers, the parents, to speak at sentencing?
I don't. I think they, like the prosecution, would just like this whole thing to go away. What is interesting, though, will any member of the Kohberger family, perhaps a sister, write a book? I've been told that one of the sisters is working on a book.
Very interesting. Do you know which one of the sisters? Are you willing to say?
I think it's the family psychologist. I get sometimes the names confused, but I think that's Melissa. I could be wrong, but the family psychologist is writing a book.
Okay, interesting. What more can we expect from you on this front?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I wrote my last article, so I thought last weekend for Airmail about the police sentencing. I'm going to be an observer of what happens. But again, I'm certainly not going to be covering a trial that's not taking place. I've signed to write another book on something completely different. One of the good things about being a reporter is that you can move from subject to subject. And now I'm going to write about space.
Howard Bloom, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Nice speaking with you.
So there are many, many questions that still remain. And will we learn any new information about this case during the sentencing hearing? That remains to be seen, but we could. We still don't know if the prosecution in its presentation plans to reveal new details that we haven't heard before. So stay tuned. We will be out here providing live coverage of this hearing for you on Law&Crime's YouTube channel, and we'll have more coverage on Crime Fix for you as well. And I do want to let you know that Bill Thompson, the Latah County prosecutor, he has asked Judge Hippler to extend the no contact order in this case. That barred Bryan Kohberger from reaching out to any of the victims in this case. That was set to expire in 2027, but Bill Thompson is asking to extend that to 99 years. That means Bryan Kohberger will not be able to contact any of the victims in this case. No phone calls, no letters, nothing. And if he does, he could be in big trouble. So stay tuned for more coverage from us from the ground here in Boise, Idaho for the sentencing of Bryan Kohberger. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Crime Fix. I'll see you back here next time.